Here's a way of conceptualizing the relationship between psychopathology and illness, or between mental functioning and illness. Now, throughout your entire life, there's been things you understand and things you didn't understand. And some of those things you didn't understand hurt you. And some of them you investigated and you learned from and you made sure that they wouldn't happen again. And some of them you did nothing with. And that's the case in the past. And maybe that's the case in the present. So you can imagine back in your bedroom at home, there's 5 things you should have done that you hadn't, that you haven't. And so when you walk into that room, you get all nervous because the things that you haven't done yell at you because you haven't done them. And what they yell is, here's a bunch of negative possible worlds ready to emerge that you're ignoring. And if you ignore them, then they'll emerge. So don't pay your taxes and see what sort of world emerges. And you think, well, that's a piece of paper when you look at it. But it's not a piece of paper. It's a bunch of potential nasty worlds that are lying on your desk, and they're likely to manifest themselves unless you do something about it. And your brain is smart enough to know that, even though your eyes can't see it. And you walk into your room, you won't look at your damn desk because it's covered with crap that you won't look at. And the more your life is like that, the more stress you have. So imagine, and I think this is how it works. I think the amygdala, which tags things with fear, has access to the memory of the things you don't understand. And all it says is, something went wrong here. And maybe you have 1,000 of those things in your memory. Something went wrong here. And that's a memory that you remember that hurts you when you remember it. And then there's another part of your brain that says, here's things that happened to me that I understand. And then there's a ratio. Things you haven't dealt with to things you have dealt with. The higher the ratio, the more cortisol your hypothalamus puts out, because your brain assumes that you don't know what the hell you're doing or where you are. And because you don't know, you should be in a state of emergency preparation. And that's, if you're in that state long enough, you will be one sick pup. And it might be mentally ill, depending on whatever your propensity is, but it could just as easily be physically ill. And let's see. And I don't think that matters, and this is what the research indicates too. I don't think that matters if the unknown material is in your past, that's painful memories, or if it's in your present, that's things you know you're avoiding, or if it's in your future, which is a place you're terrified of because you don't know what to do with it. And insofar as all of that territory that you inhabit from the past to the future is unexplored and chaotic, then your brain is going to be in an emergency state and it's going to make you ill. And if you're in a family like that, and lots of families are like that, right? They never fight. Nothing's ever wrong. They never discuss a problem. I had a client tell me last night. I'll tell you 2 stories and then I'll quit. A client told me last night, she was a Sikh woman. She knew a woman who'd been married for 70 years, 65 years. 20 minutes before she died, she told her husband that he had made her life a living hell and that she'd be nothing but a slave. And she figured that my client believed that she waited till she knew she was going to die to say that. So then my wife worked in the palliative care ward, and she was in there with a guy who was dying of cancer. And his wife used to come in and clip his nails about 1/8 of an inch too short. Right, and this happens all the time. And the reason this happens to people is because they leave their lives cluttered messes, and they don't take the chaos that they know is there and go through the work to turn it into something pristine and functional. And it does them in. And we never see any, we don't see any recognition of this sort of thing in any of our psychotherapeutic, especially our psychotherapeutic models of causality. You know, because, and I think it's because we're not willing to take the ethical bull by the horns and understand that human health is a matter of moral action, perhaps more than it is a matter of anything else. And I think the reason that we don't want to admit to that or even to discuss it generally is because I don't think people want to think of their own lives in that manner because it would burden them with too much responsibility. And so I think all the coverage, the sort of pseudo-scientific objective claptrap that goes along with much of our diagnostic strategizing is a form of sin of omission designed to shield us from what it is that we're doing that actually makes people sick. All right, well, that's good enough.
have allocated about 10 minutes for questions. So, Ed? Okay, I'll try to be brief. You touched at the outset on the very common notion that mental health, gets frequently equated with kind of social function. Right? The idea that sanity is the ability to pay your taxes.
Right.
But by extension from that, what do you think about things, non-ordinary states, okay, like schizophrenia or epileptic hallucination, right? That we define as psychopathology that the previous cultures, like shamanic cultures, have defined in a privileged way.
Every culture is afraid of its own taboo, so that's one of ours. I think the reason that we don't like states like that is because they're capable of showing us that things aren't the way we think they are. And people don't like that. One of the big mysteries, for example, when Galileo was around, when Galileo was around, hypothetically, the Catholic Church didn't like the idea that, his idea, for example, that there were mountains on the moon, because the moon was supposed to be round and perfect. Most of that's overstated in a kind of peculiar interpretation of history, but it doesn't matter. When Michelangelo was alive, you couldn't dissect people. And you can see why. It's a kind of a scary thing. In the 1960s, we couldn't study hallucinogenic drugs. Why? No one has a bloody clue about them. It's starting up again now. There was a study done 2 years ago on psilocybin mushrooms at Johns Hopkins. But no, we don't like that sort of thing because it shows us all those states, those altered states, are pathways in some sense to a world that's nothing like the way we think the world is. And so we're so terrified of that, it's illegal. So that's that as far as I can tell. And we're starting to understand the neurobiology of those states as well. I mean, that's one thing that's lovely about neurobiology is it plumps away in ways that can't be suppressed because it's so complicated. It's hard to make it illegal. So...
you mentioned the personifications of the
Yeah, well, these demonic figures were shapeshifters, right? They're all like manifestations of the same underlying thing. And so, they'll be assigned one set of attributes by one thinker and another set by another. The real point is that there's, sort of a king of evil in this sense, which would be the archetype of evil, which is something like pride and arrogance combined with deceit. It's as the generator of all evils. And then there's subtypes of evil, and that's sort of what they were getting at here. It's like it's a hierarchy in a sense of action patterns that's given kind of a quasi-divine status.
Some of them, though, seem, Satan or Lucifer would be characterized as people in a sense, whereas Leviathan might be characterized more as a monster, as something that doesn't really have intentional powers. You know what I mean? So why the distinction?
Well, sometimes people think of chaos as demonic. No wonder, because if it comes up from underneath and swallows you, even if you might come out the other end, like Jonah, that doesn't mean it doesn't look like a monster when it swallows you, right? And anything monstrous is easily made demonic. So separating chaos from evil is no easy matter. It's no easy matter for modern people, right? Although I think the separation, can and should be made. He blackmailed 11-year-old girls into performing degrading sexual acts on the internet.
I feel better now. What I was wondering is
the monster category is he's predatory reptile.
But we're distancing, right? So that we don't really explore that thing.
Yeah, and no kidding. Right? Do you want to relate to it? No, I'm serious. If you right, exactly. Look, if you look at most mythological representations of that kind of understanding, even if it's a divine thing that manages the understanding is almost always associated with the destruction of consciousness, at least of some element of consciousness. So that's partly why people shrink from it. It's like it's not that easy to define what's human. Look, you could say, let's say you get angry. Well, that's one way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it is anger gets you.